She arrived at the Chicago Memorial Emergency Room the way every rookie nurse arrives, shoulders curved, badge crooked, eyes that avoided contact. The chief of medicine called her the pale, quiet one. The residents took bets on how long she'd last, and when the gangsters walked in shooting that Tuesday night, weapons pointed at helpless patients, demanding silence, they ignored her too. The biggest mistake any of them would ever make. Because before she put on those worn blue scrubs, she spent 8 years doing things that exist in no public file, no declassified report, no official record. 8 years as an operator with SEAL Team 6, the most lethal unit the United States ever put on this earth. She scaled building facades in Yemen in complete darkness. She eliminated high-value targets in Iran without firing a single shot. She pulled hostages out of underground bunkers in Afghanistan with nothing but a blade in 30 seconds. And when the first gunshot echoed through that hospital corridor, something inside her woke up, quiet, precise, cold, and absolutely unstoppable. What those gangsters witnessed when they tried to take that hospital will leave you completely frozen in shock. Now, before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're listening from. Welcome to Secrets of Silent Badges. The first thing Maya Callahan did every morning was check the exits. Not consciously, not anymore. It was muscle memory, the kind burned into a person by 8 years of walking into rooms where the wrong door meant dying. She counted them without looking up from the intake forms. 3 exits on this floor, 2 stairwells, 1 freight elevator that nobody used after midnight. Old habit. She clicked her pen and focused on the clipboard. The Chicago Memorial Hospital Emergency Department smelled like bleach and burned coffee and the particular kind of despair that collects in places where people arrive broken and pray to leave whole. It was loud tonight. It was always loud on Tuesday nights in this part of the South Side. Maya had figured that out in her first week. She had been here 11 months. 11 months of keeping her head down. 11 months of worn blue scrubs and flat-soled shoes, and hair pulled back so tight it gave her a headache by noon. 11 months of being invisible on purpose. She was good at invisible. She had trained for it. Callahan. The voice came from behind her like a cold hand on the back of her neck. Not because it startled her. Nothing startled her anymore. But because of the tone it carried. The tone that said she was about to be reminded of her place. She turned slowly. Doctor. Richard Holt stood at the nurse's station with a patient chart in one hand and a styrofoam cup of coffee in the other. He was 53 years old, silver-haired, broad-shouldered in the way that men who used to be athletes carry themselves long after the athleticism is gone.
He had been chief of emergency medicine at Chicago Memorial for 16 years. He had the kind of authority that filled a room. Maya had been in rooms with generals. She knew the difference between authority that was earned and authority that was simply assumed. Holt assumed his. These triage notes.
He held the chart toward her without looking at it. Incomplete. Again. I flagged the chest pain in bed 7 as cardiac. The BP reading was, I can read a BP reading, Callahan. What I cannot read is your handwriting. And what I cannot understand is why someone with your level of experience continues to submit paperwork that looks like it was completed by someone who learned English last week. A resident nearby pretended to study a monitor. 2 nurses at the station found reasons to look at their shoes. Maya held his gaze. She kept her face neutral, soft jaw, relaxed brow. The face she had practiced in the mirror of a forward operating base in Yemen while her team slept, and she sat alone trying to remember how to look like someone who had never seen what she had seen. I'll redo it, she said. You'll redo it now, before the next intake. Understood. He looked at her a moment longer than necessary. People sometimes did that with Maya without knowing why. Something in her stillness made them uneasy, like looking at a lake that was too calm. He walked away. The resident exhaled. A young woman named Torres, first year, sharp, kind in the way that emergency medicine hadn't burned out of her yet, moved to Maya's side. He does that to everyone, Torres said quietly. Don't take it personally. I don't, Maya said, and she meant it. She had been called worse things by people with actual authority. She had been dressed down by a commander in front of 40 operators in the Bagram heat. She had been screamed at in 3 languages in a Karachi safe house while bleeding through a field dressing on her left side. Dr. Richard Holt and his styrofoam cup did not register. She picked up the chart and began rewriting the notes. Her handwriting was fine. It was precise. It was the handwriting of someone trained to fill out reports in the dark, in moving vehicles, in the 30 seconds between actions when documentation meant the difference between a mission debriefed correctly and a mission that disappeared into the classified void. Holt simply did not like her. She had understood that within the first 72 hours. Some people sense things in other people that they cannot name. Holt had sensed something in Maya Callahan, and it made him uncomfortable, and so he had decided to make her uncomfortable in return. It was the oldest dynamic in the world. Maya had no interest in fighting it. She just needed to stay invisible, stay quiet, stay here. Here was the only place that felt close to something like peace, or as close to peace as someone like her was probably going to get. The ED was chaos in a structure she understood: triage, priority, action, reassess. It wasn't so different from a combat casualty situation when you stripped away the linoleum floors and the fluorescent lights and replaced them with dirt and smoke and the sound of rotors. She had been doing this her whole life, just in different rooms. She set the completed chart in the rack and moved to check on bed 7. The man in bed 7 was named Gerald. He was 61, overweight, terrified, and convinced he was dying. He might have been right. His pressure had been irregular on intake, and Maya had flagged it immediately, not because the numbers told her to, but because of the shade of grey around his lips and the way he was breathing through his nose with too much effort. She had seen that look before. Not in hospitals, in fields, in alleys, in the back seats of vehicles that were moving too fast toward bases that were too far away. She had learned to read that look fast. "How are you doing, Gerald?" She pulled the curtain and checked his monitor. "Terrible," he said. "Is the doctor coming?" "He'll be here soon. Try to breathe normally. In through the nose, out through the mouth. You sound very calm for someone standing next to a man who might be having a heart attack." "You're not having a heart attack, Gerald." "How do you know?" "Because your rhythm is irregular but stable. If you were actively infarcting, your pain would be radiating to your left arm and jaw. Is it?" He blinked. "No." "Then breathe." He breathed. She adjusted his oxygen line and made a note on his chart. Gerald watched her with the expression of someone who had expected to be told what they wanted to hear, and instead received information. "You're different," he said. "Am I?" "Most nurses sort of pat your hand and tell you everything is going to be fine." "Everything is going to be fine," Maya said. "But I thought you'd prefer to know why." She left him breathing more slowly. Back at the station, she ran through the rest of the board. 14 active patients, 3 pending labs, 1 surgical consult that Holt had assigned to the wrong attending and hadn't noticed yet. She made a note, but said nothing. Fixing Holt's errors too visibly would cost her more than it was worth. Pick your battles. Another thing she had learned early. In the SEAL teams, you learned fast which hills were worth dying on. In a hospital ED, you learned the same thing, just with fewer literal hills. Torres appeared at her elbow again. "Incoming," she said. 2 GSWs, ETA 4 minutes. Shooter still active in the area. Maya's pen stopped. "Shooter still active," she repeated. "Police scanner. Sounds like a gang thing near Ashland. Could be nothing. Could be more coming in. Could be nothing." Maya set down the pen. She turned very slowly and looked at the ambulance bay doors. Something shifted in her chest. Not fear. She had not felt fear in a long time. Not since the night in a Mosul apartment building when she had been separated from her team and had to make her way through 4 floors of hostile territory using only a suppressed sidearm and what her instructor at Bud S had once called a deeply inconvenient gift for staying alive. What shifted in her chest now was recognition. The feeling of a situation changing shape. She had spent 8 years learning to feel it before anyone else in the room did. The way the air pressure changes before a storm. The way a crowd moves differently when something dangerous is at its edges. The way a room gets quiet in the wrong way. The ED was getting quiet in the wrong way. She scanned without appearing to scan. The automatic doors. The parking structure visible through the ambulance bay windows. The family waiting area where 6 people sat with the tension of people who had been waiting too long and were trying not to think about why. The radio at the security desk crackled. The guard, a man named Pete who was 58 years old and had bad knees and read paperback thrillers during the slow hours, leaned toward it. Maya was 12 feet away, and she heard it clearly. Units responding, suspect vehicle, dark blue Suburban, heading south on Ashland toward... Pete turned the volume down. Maya looked at the ambulance bay doors. Dark blue Suburban. She had ridden in dark blue Suburbans for 6 years. She knew exactly what they were used for in environments like this one. She knew the sight lines from a vehicle like that to a building like this. She knew how many people fit comfortably in the back seats when those people were carrying weapons under their jackets. She knew things she was not supposed to know anymore. The ambulance bay doors burst open. 2 paramedics came in fast with a gurney. Male, late 20s, 2 gunshot wounds to the torso, conscious and terrified. Behind them a second gurney. Female, early 40s, shoulder wound, screaming. And behind the second gurney, walking through the open ambulance bay doors before they could swing shut, unhurried, deliberate, spread across the entrance like they owned the space they moved through, came 4 men in dark jackets. They were not patients. Maya knew that before any of them reached into their jackets. She knew it from the way they walked, the spacing between them, the way their eyes swept the room in a pattern she recognized from 2 continents and a decade of studying people who entered spaces with violence already decided. She had done exactly what they were doing now. Entered rooms, controlled them, eliminated variables. Her hands were very still at her sides. Somewhere behind her, Torres said, "Oh God," and someone knocked over a tray of instruments, and the sound of metal hitting linoleum echoed sharp and bright through the suddenly silent emergency department. The man at the front, broad, close-cropped, a scar running from his left ear to the edge of his jaw, raised what was under his jacket. "Nobody move," he said. "Nobody call anybody, and nobody does anything stupid." He looked around the room. His eyes moved across doctors and nurses and patients and visitors like he was cataloging furniture. They moved across Maya Callahan. They moved on. She exhaled once. Slowly. Her right hand drifted to the supply cart beside her. Her fingers closed around the edge of it without gripping. A light touch. The kind you learn when you need your hands ready without signaling that your hands are ready. She had spent 8 years being the most dangerous thing in rooms that didn't know she was there. She looked at the man with the scar. She looked at the 3 behind him. She looked at the exits she had counted that morning without thinking. Something inside her, quiet and cold and very, very old, stopped pretending it was asleep. The man with the scar had a name. Maya didn't know it yet, but she knew his type. She had seen men like him in Fallujah, in Kandahar, in a basement in Beirut that smelled like motor oil and old fear. Men who had learned that a raised weapon was a conversation ender. Men who had never been in a room where someone raised a weapon back. She stayed still. That was the first rule. In a hostage situation, and that was what this was now, regardless of what anyone in this ED wanted to call it, movement created escalation. Escalation created casualties. You controlled the clock. You bought time. You gathered information. She was gathering. 4 men. Front man with the scar, clearly the lead. Positioning himself at the center of the room, back to the ambulance bay, eyes moving. His weapon was a Glock 19, held low but ready. Second man, shorter, heavier, moving toward the nurse's station. Third, Young, maybe 20, sweating through his collar, eyes too wide. Fourth near the family waiting area, blocking the exit corridor. The young one was the problem. Experienced men in violent situations moved with a kind of terrible calm. It was the inexperienced ones who fired without deciding to, the ones whose fingers tensed on triggers because of sounds, because of sudden movements, because of nothing at all. Maya kept her eyes on him. Phones on the desk, the scar man said. All of them, staff, patients, everybody. You put it down or I put you down. Your choice, and I'll only give it once. People moved. Hands shook. A phone clattered to the floor, and the young one swung his weapon toward the sound, and Maya's weight shifted forward 1 centimeter before she stopped herself. Not yet. Torres was 3 feet to her left, completely rigid, phone already surrendered, eyes fixed on Maya with an expression that said, "Tell me what to do," and Maya gave her nothing visible. No eye contact, no signal. To look at someone in a situation like this was to mark them. She would not mark Torres. Pete, the security guard, had his hands up. His own weapon, a standard-issue sidearm he had probably not drawn in 6 years, was still holstered. He was making the right call. 1 armed guard against 4 men with nothing to lose was not a gunfight. It was a funeral. The scar man moved to the center of the room. "We're looking for someone," he said. His voice was controlled, practiced. The voice of someone who had done versions of this before. "Patient came in 20 minutes ago. GSW, abdominal, name doesn't matter. What matters is, you tell us which bed, and we walk in, we walk out, and everybody in this room gets to go home to their families." Nobody spoke. He looked at the attending on duty, Dr. James Waller, 45, trauma specialist, a good doctor, and currently the color of old chalk. "You," the scar man said. "You're in charge here?" Waller opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Maya watched the scar man's expression shift. Not to anger, to assessment. He was recalculating. Deciding whether the doctor was going to be useful, or whether he needed to find someone else to apply pressure to. His eyes moved across the room again. This time they stopped on Maya. She had positioned herself slightly apart from the cluster of staff near the nurse's station. Not dramatically, not enough to signal anything. Just enough that if she needed to move, she would not have to move through people first. Old habit. "You." He pointed at her. "Blue scrubs. Come here." She came. She walked at a measured pace. Not fast enough to look eager, not slow enough to look reluctant. The pace of someone compliant and frightened and nothing else at all. She stopped in front of him. He was 6 feet tall, 210 pounds approximately. The scar on his jaw was old, years old, well healed. There was a second one on the back of his right hand that she clocked in the first second. Entry wound, small caliber, fully healed. He had been shot before and had kept moving. She filed that. "You're a nurse?" he said. "Yes." "You know every patient in this department?" "I know the ones I've treated." "GSW, abdominal, male. Came in 25 minutes ago. Where is he?" She knew exactly who he meant. The first gurney that had come through the ambulance bay doors. The young man, late 20s, 2 wounds to the right side. Semi-conscious on arrival. Bed 12, behind the trauma curtain at the back of the department. She also knew what would happen to that man if she answered. "I'd need to check the board," she said. His jaw tightened. "Then check it." She turned toward the board. And in the 3 seconds that her back was to him, 3 seconds she was acutely aware of in the way a person is aware of a loaded weapon at their spine, she mapped the department again. Supply cart to the left, crash cart to the right. Defibrillator mounted on the wall, charged, ready. Laryngoscope and surgical tray behind curtain 1. Oxygen tanks, 3 of them, along the far wall. She had been told, many times, by many instructors in many unpleasant places, that the most dangerous person in any room was not the one with the most weapons. It was the one who could see what everything in the room actually was. She looked at the board. Bed 12 was not visible from the board without knowing what to look for. She took 4 seconds longer than necessary. Let him think she was searching. Let him think she was scared. Let him think she was nothing. "I don't see a recent abdominal GSW," she said. "Could be he's still in triage." The scarman made a sound. "Don't play games with me. I'm not playing anything." She turned back. "I'm telling you what I see. If you want me to check triage, I can check triage." He stared at her. She held his eyes. Not with challenge, not with defiance. With the blankness of a woman who had looked at worse things than him and had not flinched and was not about to start now. Something moved across his face. A flicker. He didn't know what he was looking at, but he knew it wasn't quite what he expected. "Fine," he said. "Check triage, and if you try anything—" "I understand," she said. She moved toward the triage area. Behind her, the young one was getting more agitated. She could hear it in his breathing from across the room. Fast, shallow, the rhythm of someone whose adrenaline was spiking without an outlet. She needed to work faster. The triage area was separated from the main ED by a half wall and a curtain. Maya stepped through and stopped. There were 2 patients waiting. An elderly man with a laceration on his forearm. A teenage girl with her mother, possible fracture, arm in a makeshift sling. They had seen the men with weapons come in. They were sitting very still and very quiet and looking at Maya with the eyes of people who had decided she might be the difference between what happened next being survivable or not. She gave them a small nod. "Calm. Stay calm." Then she turned her back to the curtain and began to think. She had 90 seconds before the scarman sent someone to check on her, maybe less. She knew the rhythm of these situations, the way patience eroded when the person you sent didn't immediately come back. She had 4 armed men, an unknown number of additional personnel possibly outside, 1 security guard neutralized by position, approximately 30 civilians including staff and patients, and 1 target in bed 12 who was the reason any of this was happening. She needed to understand why before she moved. The man in bed 12. She ran it back. 2 GSWs, right side. Conscious on arrival, which meant the wounds were serious but not immediately fatal. He had come in with the paramedics from the Ashland incident. The shooting that had triggered all of this was not random. It was targeted. This man had seen something or done something that made him a problem for the people now standing in her emergency department, which meant he was probably a witness, which meant they were not here to rob anyone. They were here to execute someone in a hospital bed. That changed everything. You could negotiate with people who wanted money or wanted to escape. You could not negotiate with people who had a job to finish and no reason to leave anyone alive who could identify them. She had 60 seconds now. She looked at the triage cart. Standard contents: bandage scissors, penlight, BP cuff, 2 syringes preloaded with saline for flushing lines, a sealed package of 10-gauge needles, alcohol wipes, a small pulse oximeter. Not much, but she had worked with less. She thought about the oxygen tanks along the far wall. She thought about the defibrillator. She thought about the IV pole near curtain 3 that was the heaviest object within immediate reach of the main corridor. She thought about the young one and his breathing. She thought about the scar man and the way his weight was distributed, slightly forward, right foot dominant. The stance of someone trained to move, but not trained to expect a response from the direction he wasn't watching. She thought about Torres. Torres was smart, and she was calm under pressure, and she was standing approximately 6 feet from the secondary exit that led to the stairwell. Maya reached into the triage cart. She removed the bandage scissors, heavy, blunt-tipped, but solid, and put them in her left scrub pocket. She removed one of the preloaded syringes and put it in her right. Saline was not a weapon, but a needle entering a precise point on a nerve cluster in a wrist was a very effective way to make a hand release whatever it was holding. She had learned that in a Coronado training room at 3 in the morning from a woman named Petty Officer Torres, no relation, who had laughed while demonstrating it, and said the only thing better than a weapon was knowing your target didn't know you had one. 45 seconds. She moved back toward the curtain, paused, and tilted her head exactly enough to see the main floor through the gap at the curtain's edge. The scar man was near the nurse's station. The heavy one was behind it, rifling through the desk. The fourth man by the exit was still stationary. The young one had moved. He was now closer to the patient beds, moving slowly along the curtains, pulling them back one at a time. He was looking for bed 12 himself. He was going to find it in approximately 40 seconds. Maya stopped thinking. She had been in this place before, the place past analysis, past planning, past the part where you ran scenarios. The place where your training simply activated because the window for any other option had closed. Her shoulders went back. It happened without deciding. The way a language you learned in childhood comes back in your mouth when you hear it after years of silence. Her spine straightened, her chin leveled. Her breathing dropped from 12 breaths per minute to 8. The posture of someone who had led teams through darkness and brought them home. She came through the curtain. She came fast and quiet, and she covered the distance to the young one in 5 steps before he registered her movement. And when his head turned, she was already there, her left hand closing on his weapon wrist, the mechanical compression of the precise point on the radial nerve that she had practiced until it was reflex, and his grip failed and the weapon dropped, and her right hand caught it before it hit the floor. The whole thing took 2 seconds. He made a sound, sharp, surprised, cut off, and she had the weapon pressed to her side, muzzle down, not raised, and she was looking at the scar man across the room who had turned at the sound. "Let them go," she said. Her voice was different now, not loud, not aggressive. It was the voice that carried across an airfield at 0300 and made people move without asking why. The command voice. Every person in the room heard it change. She saw it in their faces, staff, patients, the scar man himself. The stillness of people registering that the thing they thought they understood had just become something else entirely. The scar man raised his weapon. "Put it down," he said. "Last warning." "That's not how this works," Maya said. "There are 30 civilians in this room and a trauma patient in bed 12 who needs surgery in the next 2 hours or he will die. You didn't come here for any of these people, so here's what happens now. Your 3 walk out the ambulance bay. I let this one go at the door, and nobody in this room was able to identify anyone." The scar man stared at her. "Who are you?" he said. It was the first time his voice had changed pitch. "The nurse who's telling you to leave," she said. The heavy one behind the station had his weapon up now too. 2 guns on her across a room full of people. She did not move. From bed 12 came a sound, a monitor alarm, sharp and insistent, the tone of a pressure drop. The GSW patient's pressure was crashing. He was bleeding out faster than they had controlled for in triage. Nobody in this room was going to let that man die on her watch. Not the gangsters, not Holt, not anybody. She looked at the scar man and she said very quietly, "I've been in rooms like this one. I've been in worse ones. And every single person who pointed a weapon at me, the way you're pointing yours at me right now, is no longer a concern to anyone." Silence. Complete, heavy silence. The young one, still cradling his wrist, eyes wide, looked at her the way people sometimes looked at things they couldn't categorize. Torres, 6 feet from the stairwell exit, had not moved. Maya gave her one look. One. Torres understood. She moved to the exit. The scar man saw it. He swung toward Torres. And in the half-second that his eyes were off Maya, she crossed the distance between them in 4 steps that were nothing like the steps of a nurse, and everything like the steps of someone who had trained for thousands of hours in the science of closing space before a target could respond. She was on him before he completed the swing. The scar man was good. She would give him that. He recovered fast, faster than most. The moment her hand closed on his weapon arm, he was already pivoting, already driving his elbow back toward her face, already doing the thing that trained people do when their primary weapon is compromised: go to the secondary. She had expected it. She trapped the elbow before it connected, used his own rotational momentum to turn him, and applied pressure to the joint in a direction it was not designed to travel. He went down to one knee with a sound that was more surprise than pain, and she had his weapon secured before the knee hit the floor. 2 seconds. The heavy one fired. The shot went wide, too wide, the shot of someone who had never fired in a room with people he needed to stay alive, and punched through a supply cabinet behind Maya's left shoulder. Glass and plastic rained. Someone screamed. Maya was already moving, low and lateral, using the Scarman's kneeling body as a temporary barrier while she calculated the angle. The heavy one was behind the nurse's station. Partial cover. Elevated position by 3 inches, the platform behind the desk. Right hand dominant, weapon in right hand, leaning to his right to aim, which meant his left side was open if she came from the right corridor at the correct angle. She came from the right corridor at the correct angle. She covered the distance in 6 steps. He swung the weapon toward her and she was already inside the arc of it, her left forearm deflecting the weapon hand up and outward, her right elbow connecting with his sternum at a precise point that sent all available air out of his lungs in one involuntary burst. The weapon came free. She put it on the desk and put him on the floor and turned. The fourth man, the one who had been blocking the exit corridor, was running toward her, running, not tactical, not trained, running the way someone runs when everything they understood about a situation has inverted and the only response available is forward momentum. She waited. She let him close half the distance. Then she stepped to the side. He could not stop in time. She helped him with that, a precise redirect of his momentum using his jacket collar and the natural arc of his own speed. And he went into the supply cart with enough force to put it on its side, and him under it. He did not get up immediately. 3 seconds of silence. Maya stood in the center of the emergency department holding 2 weapons she had not brought in and breathing at 8 breaths per minute. The young one was still cradling his wrist near the trauma curtains. The scar man was on one knee. The heavy one was on the floor behind the nurse's station. The fourth was partially under the supply cart. She looked at Pete, the security guard. "Cuff them," she said, starting with the one on his knee. "Use their own belts if you don't have enough cuffs." Pete stared at her. "Now, Pete." He moved. Torres came back through the stairwell door with 2 uniformed officers behind her. She had made it out. She had made the call. Maya registered this with something that was not quite relief. She had calculated Torres would make it, but was adjacent to it. The officers took in the room. The scar man on his knee, the heavy one on the floor, the overturned cart. One of the officers, young, hand on his holster, looked at Maya. "Ma'am, can you—" "Bed 12, Maya said. "GSW patient, abdominal, pressure drop on the monitor. He needs a surgeon now. Everything else can wait." She was already moving toward the trauma bay. She pushed through the curtain. The man in bed 12 was 27 years old. She knew that from the intake form. His name was Daniel Reyes, and he had come in with 2 gunshot wounds to the right side, one of which had nicked the hepatic artery. She had suspected it on intake, and the monitor had confirmed it when the pressure began to fall. He was grey. The same grey Gerald had been, but deeper. The grey of someone whose body was beginning to make decisions about where to send the blood that remained. She snapped on gloves. Holt appeared at the curtain. He had seen everything. She knew that from his face, the color of a man who had watched something happen in his department that his 16 years of authority had done nothing to prepare him for. He stood in the opening of the curtain and looked at Reyes. He looked at the monitor. He looked at Maya's hands, already moving to the IV tray, already selecting the gauge, already 3 steps ahead of whatever he was about to say. He said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then, quietly, not with the tone he used in the morning, not with the styrofoam cup voice, not with the voice that reminded people of their place, he said, What do you need? 3 words. Maya did not look up. 2 large-bore IVs, both anticubitals. O-neg from the bank, 4 units to start. Push the first one wide open. Pressure bag. Ultrasound. Right side, I want to confirm the hepatic. And a surgical team paged 30 seconds ago. He moved. He did not question. He did not redirect. He did not stand in the doorway deciding whether her assessment warranted his attention. He moved with the efficiency of a man who had just watched someone disarm 4 armed men with their bare hands and had recalibrated in the space of those 4 seconds everything he thought he knew about the woman he had been dismissing for 11 months. Maya began the IV access. Left antecubital first, large bore, 14 gauge, seated on the first attempt because her hands did not shake. They had not shaken in years. Right antecubital second, same result. Torres handed her the first blood unit without being asked. Pressure bag, Maya said. It appeared. She ran the blood in fast and reached for the portable ultrasound with her free hand. She positioned the probe on Reyes's right upper quadrant and looked at the screen. There. Free fluid around the liver, significant. The hepatic artery was bleeding into the abdominal cavity and had been doing so since before he arrived. The pressure drop on the monitor was not a spike, it was a trend. He had been bleeding for 40 minutes. Surgical team has 12 minutes, she said. We need to keep his pressure above 80 systolic for 12 minutes. That means volume in and no more drops. She checked the IV line. She checked the monitor. She checked Reyes's pupils, equal, reactive, slightly sluggish. He was holding. Barely. You're going to be okay, she told him. He was not fully conscious, but she said it anyway. She had learned that. In places where medicine was performed in conditions that had no business supporting life, she had learned that the voice of a person who believed what they were saying could reach someone whose body was deciding whether to keep fighting. She believed it now. She was going to make sure it was true. Maya stayed with Reyes until the surgeons took over. She backed out of the trauma bay and stood in the corridor and allowed herself exactly 4 seconds of stillness. 4 seconds of not being in motion, not calculating, not moving. Then she pulled off her gloves. A hand touched her shoulder. She moved before she registered who it was, a quarter turn, weight forward, and stopped. It was Torres. Sorry, Torres said, stepping back. Sorry, I should have. It's fine, Maya exhaled. It's fine. Are you okay? Am I okay? Torres stared at her. Maya, with 4 of them, are you okay? Maya said again, firmly, kindly. Torres blinked. Yes, yeah, I'm okay. Good. She looked at the main floor. The uniformed officers had the 4 men secured. Additional units had arrived. The ED was loud again, the loud of aftermath, of people processing, of voices overlapping as everyone spoke at once because that was what people did when the silence finally broke. A detective had arrived. She could see him near the nurses' station, notebook already open, moving through the staff systematically. She watched him for a moment. He would get to her. She needed to decide what she was going to say when he did. She thought about that for exactly as long as she allowed herself to think about things she could not yet control. Then she went to check on Gerald. Gerald was fine. His rhythm had stabilized while nobody was watching, and he was sitting up in bed eating crackers from the small packet Maya had left him, and watching the situation in the main ED with the alert fascination of someone who had paid for a movie and was getting considerably more than advertised. That was you, he said when she came in. Out there. How are you feeling, Gerald? That was absolutely you. I saw through the curtain gap. You moved like... He paused. I was in the Army, 79th Infantry, a long time ago. I know how people move who've been trained to move that way. He looked at her. Who are you, sweetheart? Someone who's very glad your rhythm stabilized, she said. She checked his monitor. His pressure was steady. His color was better. The grayness around his lips was gone. You saved that man's life, Gerald said, the one they were after. The surgeons are saving his life. You bought them the time to do it. She made a note on his chart. "Gerald," she said, "when the detective comes to take your statement, tell him everything you saw. Don't minimize it. What happened in this department tonight is going to matter for that young man's case." Gerald nodded. Then he looked at her again, steady and serious. The look of a man who had been young and trained, and had never quite stopped being that thing underneath everything else he became. "Thank you," he said, "whatever your name actually is." She left him to his crackers. The detective's name was Carver. He found her in the supply room 3 minutes later. She was restocking the triage cart methodically, because the triage cart needed restocking and because having her hands occupied gave her something to do while she processed the sensation of a situation that had cracked open in a direction she had not fully planned for. "Ms. Callahan?" he said. "Yes." He was around 50. Solid, unhurried, the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough that urgency was a tool he deployed deliberately rather than a state he lived in. "Detective Carver, CPD. I need to get your statement." "Of course. Can you walk me through what happened?" She walked him through it. She was precise, and she was accurate, and she was careful. She told him what she had observed. The 4 men, their positioning, their weapons, their stated purpose. She told him what she had done, intervened when the patient in bed 12 was at imminent risk, secured the immediate threat, ensured the medical team could function. She did not tell him how she had done it. He let her talk without interrupting. He took notes in the compact shorthand of someone trained to capture information without losing the thread of a conversation. When she finished, he looked at his notebook. Then he looked at her. "Ms. Callahan," he said, "I've been with CPD 22 years. I've taken statements from a lot of people who were in a lot of situations." He paused. "What you just described, the disarming, the sequence, the control of the room, that's not a civilian response. That's not even a trained civilian response. What you did tonight is something I've seen done by people with very specific backgrounds." She said nothing. "You want to tell me about that background?" he said. "I'm a nurse," she said. "You're something else, too." The supply room was quiet. Behind them, through the wall, the sounds of the ED rebuilding itself, the monitors resuming their rhythms, the voices settling back into the familiar cadences of a department returning to function. "The 4 men in custody," Maya said. "The one with the scar on his jaw. He's not the principal. He's a contractor. The operation tonight was organized by someone who wanted Daniel Reyes dead before he could give a statement. You need to find out who Reyes was going to talk to and work backward from there. The contractor won't give you the principal willingly, but the young one will. He's scared and he's not committed and he's going to want a deal before morning." Carver looked at her for a long moment. "That's a very specific analysis," he said. "It's an obvious one if you look at the operational structure." "Operational structure," he repeated. She realized what she had said. She did not correct it. There was a sound in the corridor outside the supply room. Firm, unhurried footsteps. The cadence of someone who walked like they owned the floors they walked on, regardless of what floor it was. The door opened. The man who stepped in was around 45, 6'2", broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that did not need a uniform to communicate authority. He was wearing civilian clothes, dark jacket, open collar. But he was not a civilian in any way that mattered. He looked at Maya. She looked at him. He had a scar through his left eyebrow. She had given it to him. Not maliciously. In a training exercise off the coast of Virginia in 2019, when they had both been moving fast through a simulated structure and had misjudged the same corner from opposite directions, and the resulting collision had split his brow open and knocked her flat, and they had both lain on the deck for a moment before the laughter started. She had not laughed in a long time. "Detective Carver," the man said without looking away from Maya. "I'm going to need 5 minutes with Ms. Callahan." Carver looked between them. "And you are?" The man produced credentials. Carver looked at them. Something in his expression shifted, the professional recalibration of a man who had just identified a jurisdiction line he did not want to step over. 5 minutes, Carver said. He left and closed the door. The man looked at Maya. Petty Officer Callahan, he said. I'm not that anymore, she said. You were tonight. She set down the bandage roll she had been holding. The man's name was Commander David Reese, Naval Special Warfare Command. He had been her team leader for 3 of the 8 years she had spent doing things that did not exist in any public record. He had written her separation paperwork himself at her request 18 months ago. He had not looked surprised to see her. You knew, she said. It was not a question. We've known where you were for 11 months, he said. Chicago Memorial, South Side, night shifts and occasional days. Then why? Because you needed it, he said. And because we needed to know you were stable. And because sometimes the best surveillance is the kind that looks like nobody's watching. She absorbed that. Reyes, she said. Daniel Reyes. Who is he? Federal witness. He was supposed to be in protective custody as of this morning. There was a breakdown in the transfer. He ended up